Well, welcome to Grand Rapids Community College. My name is Rick Underheil. I'm the Associate Dean for Instructional Support and Interdisciplinary Studies. We're glad you're here on this warm Grand Rapids, Michigan evening. I want to extend a special welcome to our board members. I know Terry Hanlon is here, Mr. Verberg and his wife, Mrs. Verberg. Other board members? And also a special welcome to our faculty, our students, and our staff and administration, and most especially to the community. We're glad to have you all here this evening. Welcome. Grand Rapids Community College values commitments to accountability, diversity, excellence, innovation, integrity, respect, responsiveness, and sustainability. And we're delighted to share company this evening with tonight's guest, who has committed his life to these same values and within the context of teaching and learning. Dr. Ronald Ferguson is a senior lecturer in education and public policy at Harvard University. Jeffrey Canada, president of the Harlem Children's Zone, calls him a national treasure. Michael Casserly, director of the Council of the Great City Schools, says he has done more to help us understand the dynamics behind the achievement gap than anyone else in the country. And Marian Wright Edelman, who's the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, calls him thoughtful, careless, and fearful. Fearless. Fearless, excuse me. That's out of the way. It's Freudian. Dr. Ferguson is an MIT-trained economist whose research, teaching, writing, and consulting over 3 decades have focused on economic, social, and educational challenges in urban America. In 1995, Dr. Ferguson was asked by leaders of the National Community Development Initiative to organize the National Community Development Policy Analysis Network in order to help mainstream social science research and contribute more effectively to the field of urban community development. His education-related work has come increasingly to focus on racial and ethnic achievement gaps, appearing in publications of the National Research Council, the Brookings Institution, the U.S. Department of Education, and various books and journals. Harvard Education Press has published a collected papers volume of his research and writing on the achievement gap for the period 1995 through 2007. The book is entitled Toward Excellence with Equity, an emerging vision for closing the achievement gap. His research and consulting on racial achievement gaps led him to create the Tripod Project for School Improvement, whose surveys are the basis of the student perceptions component of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation project on measuring effective teaching. His appearances on network and public television news programs and documentaries include the CNN Nightly News Hour, The Today Show, ABC 2020, Sunday Morning, the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour, and evening news programs on all 3 major networks. His research and perspectives on public schooling are cited regularly in newspapers and magazines, including the New York Times, the National Journal, the Washington Post, Education Week, and others. And on February 13th of this year, he was the focus of a New York Times article entitled, Closing the Achievement Gap Without Widening a Racial One. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ronald Ferguson.
Thanks. A little fearful, but good. It's good to be here, and thank you for that introduction that drew from several different places. I kind of want to welcome you to the movement. You see the title on the screen, Excellence with Equity, a Social Movement for the 21st Century. I think it is genuinely true that a movement has already begun. There are people all around the country reaching out, trying to find ways to help young people reach their full potential, to try to close achievement gaps, to all kinds of other things, focused on working together to bring about the outcomes that we all care about. I mean, for the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard, as the director of that, I get phone calls every week from folks that saying, we're doing some things and we just want to get your opinion about it. We want to know if you got any ideas about it. You know, a guy calls me and says, I got ministers from 21 states I'm working with, and we want to connect in this or that. And we got other people say, I want to work with kids. And we got various things. A woman calls and says, My husband and I started a website for young adolescent girls, and we're going around and we're grabbing well-known women of color and having video profiles that young people can go online and just watch and get ideas about a number of different kinds of positive selves. So just lots of things going on. I was with the Chamber of Commerce in North Carolina a few days ago, and the business people there are talking about movement building. Okay, I was planning to go up and talk about some of the things I'll talk about today, and I was kind of hesitant to talk about movements with the business people because I thought they might think that's sort of touchy-feely, sort of social, too left liberal kind of talk. And one of the senior executives from GlaxoSmithKline was on the panel before me, and he said, "We've been having meetings for 20 years. We need to have a movement." And so, okay, and so lots of people are there. It's time, and if each of us can be an instigator in the movement and can find ways to contribute, we can make a huge difference. And I want to talk today about how to wrap your mind around that idea. I mean, how to get to the point where you actually believe it's plausible that we can do this. I often start, I have a collection of poems for teachers that I've written over the last decade for when I go into schools, and I start with a poem. There's one that I almost always start with that I'll start with now. Oh, I slated it over there. It's called Transformation. It's from the perspective of a child who comes into a district and feels a little different from the others, but over time things kind of work out, and it goes as follows. I started kindergarten 2 or 3 big steps behind. Some classmates understood things that had never crossed my mind. The kids who looked real different seemed so smart, I can recall. Those who looked and spoke like I did didn't seem so smart at all. Of course, there were exceptions, but on mostly any day, it was clear those kids were doing best, and we were just okay. Our teachers liked them better because they always knew the answers, so kids like me just tried to be good athletes and great dancers. The years went by quite slowly. Most things just stayed the same. Till our teacher decided it was time to change the game. She hinted that the reason when those other kids did best was that many knew already more of what was on the test. They learned it from their parents and from things they did at home, much that I and my companions never had the chance to know. That had always been the pattern. Yes, for years it was the same, but the standards movement came along to finally change the game. Now that there's a new prescription for the way our school is run, everybody's got new goals to reach. It's getting to be fun. We're learning to get smarter. Our teachers show us how. They're all serious about it. Everyone's important now. Time in class is so exciting that we seldom fool around. We might make a joke in passing, but we quickly settle down. After school, we do our homework, often in our study groups. When we need them, we have tutors, and they give us all the scoops. If there's something that's confusing, it's a temporary thing, because the teachers love to answer all the questions that we bring. All the counselors and teachers work with parents as a team, because they share the same commitment to connect us with our dreams. I love the way things are now. It all just seems so right. We still play sports, and we still cool, but now we're also bright. That first day of kindergarten, some of us were way behind, but today I'm graduating in a truly different time. Now, every stanza of that has a different issue in it, but I like to emphasize the one we're learning to get smarter. Kids have theories of intelligence, and if their theories of intelligence are they just have a fixed amount of it, if they're not doing well, they're just kind of stuck stupid. Or if they think they're smart, they're stuck smart. They tend toward what Carol Dweck in her work is called performance goals. She's the one who's most identified with this idea of kids' theories of intelligence. And if they think they're stuck stupid, then they want to hide that. So they don't want anybody to discover that they're really not smart. And so they'll go out of their way to convince other people that they don't really care about doing well in school. And the reason they're not doing well is they just don't care. They could do better if they worked hard, but they're not working hard because they really don't care. School's not important. School's stupid. Okay. But the real thing is they don't want you to discover that they think they're not smart enough and never will be, and they're trying to hide that from people. Okay. On the other hand, if they think they are smart, then they want to show off. They want everybody to know how smart they are. All right. And it's around 3rd grade when kids start to be conscious of who seems like they're smart and who seems like they're not, and they start to talk about it. And they have to come to terms with the position in their rank order of achievement. If I think I'm not smart, I've got to come to terms with that. If I think I am smart, I've got to figure what that means. Sometimes for the high achieving kids at 3rd grade, what it means for them is they got to announce it to everybody, including the low achievers. Okay, I actually live with a child who struggles academically. In third grade was the time that I could name the kid who thought it was his duty to tell my son that, you know, you have a hard time, you don't understand stuff real fast. That means you're not smart. Or your handwriting's not very good. Maybe you should be at another school. Maybe you shouldn't go to school here. And those kinds of messages kids are getting, they have to start to deal with those. And being conscious that that's part of the dynamic means we need to work on it, and we need to help kids come to a more appropriate understanding of intelligence. The fact is, the brain is much more like a muscle than it is like a fixed, constant entity. Okay? How smart you are depends upon how hard you work and how long you work hard. Okay? And if we can convince kids of that, we can keep hope alive for the ones who struggle. Okay? My little one who struggled, he just graduated from high school. He's 18 now. He still struggles some, but not as much as he used to. I can remember when he was in third grade, and I said, the kid's name was Michael Monroe, actually. I said, if you work hard, you might pass Michael right by the time you're in fifth grade. And I can remember the smile that came on his face at that moment. Just keeping hope alive, that if I don't give up, if I keep going, I can do a lot better. And kids' theories of intelligence affect the degree to which they do keep going and not give up. I just want to get how many of you in the audience are students here? How many of you are teachers here? How many of you are here primarily as parents? One? Okay, two. How many of you are here as community activists and people who are change makers in the neighborhoods and around the city? Okay, so a good number of those. How many of you work with the public schools in the district? Here. How many of you have not asked to raise your hand yet? What do you do? Oh, student University of Michigan, so students other places. Okay, but it's a real mix of people in the room. And I'm going to cover a number of different things. I'm going to speed past certain parts of it, and then you can bring me back during Q&A to the parts that I rush past. I want to get through, give you an overview of a lot of different things, and leave time to come back and have some back and forth about things. This little saying I like to start with, it's a saying from Robert Schuller. Any fool can count the seeds in an apple. It's like counting points on a test. But only God can count the apples in a seed, because the apples in a seed are latent, unharvested potential. And how many apples we ultimately harvest from the seed depends upon how effectively we cultivate the seed. The problem is the effort we put into cultivation might sometimes be affected by our expectations about how much difference it's going to make. And so if we underestimate the payoff from cultivation, we may then underinvest in cultivation and then not get the bounty of the harvest that we would have gotten if we had gone a bit further investing. So if we're going to get where we need to go with raising achievement in the United States, we're going to have to invest in cultivation past the point where it feels like it's not going to pay off enough. We're going to have to overinvest. To the degree that we don't really believe that the harvest is going to be there, we need to pretend like we believe it. When I was a kid and I didn't want to do something, my mother would say, just pretend like you want to do it. Okay? And then we can all be pleasantly surprised when we get much better results than we would have anticipated. Okay? And I can say that with some confidence because I've seen schools that do things that a lot of people didn't think were going to make any difference. But people said, do it anyway. And then they had all this progress. And they were surprised. And after a while, they learned to expect it. And so you saw high expectations after the change process because people had learned from success that they should expect a lot. Sometimes we see people expecting a lot and high performance going together, and we think it was high expectations that led to the high performance. But sometimes it's high performance that led to the high expectations. And if people don't already believe a lot in our kids, we're not going to make them change by preaching at them that they should believe more. We're going to make them change by putting some ideas on the table that can help produce better outcomes with the kids, and then create conditions that lead them to do those things even if they don't expect that it's going to matter. People say, well, that's not going to help. No, do it anyway. Okay. And then track it over a period of time, support them, and it's often going to turn out to work better than people would have anticipated. So this notion of trying to harvest latent potential, trying to get as many apples from the seed as possible, is one little handle. And as we move out and try to be instigators in the movement, part of our role is to give people little handles like this. Okay, little images, little sayings that they can use to articulate to themselves and to other people, what are we up to? Well, we're trying to get more apples out of the seed. Our kids are like seeds that are full of latent potential, and we have to cultivate effectively and do that. So there are a number of different little images that we can use to do this. The challenges, these are kinds of things that you're used to seeing before. In this nation, we've made very little progress in increasing high school graduation rates for the last 50 years. The progress that it appears we've made are mostly due to increased GEDs, general equivalency diplomas. If you take the GEDs out of the picture, there's been very little progress for 50 years in raising high school graduation rates. We can do better. Some places do better, but this is among the things we need to really work hard on. With regard to test scores, we've got large test score gaps between groups in our nation by socioeconomic status, by socioeconomic class, by which I mean income and parents' education. We've also got huge gaps between racial groups. We need to deal with all of those, but we've also got gaps between our kids and the kids in some other nations. So in the international data, there are about 14 other countries that have higher test scores than American white kids in math by their mid-teens. It's a test score series called the PISA, the Program in International Student Assessment. And there are the white kids in the U.S. are back in the pack. So we often talk about the achievement gap as if it's all the children of color that are the problem. And our white kids are the best in the world, but our children of color are back in the pack. Well, by the time they're mid-teens, our white kids are not the best in the world. Okay, and so part of our national agenda has to be to move them up too. So we need to get our white kids back up toward the best in the world, which they once were, and accelerate the progress from our non-white kids so we all meet up with world-class standards at the front of the pack. Now, it's not really out of reach. There's some places in the U.S., the state of Massachusetts, if it was a nation, would be among the highest achieving nations in the world with regard to the test score measures. Okay, I live in Massachusetts. I'm in and out of those schools. They're not that great. Okay, so it exists in our own nation. Even in this state, there are exemplary schools that would be exemplary internationally. We have to learn more about what the most effective schools are doing. We have to create conditions where other educators can draw on those lessons. We also, as I'll talk about, need to get parents more engaged and a business community more engaged, and so on. The high school graduation, the test scores have implications for earnings and employment and incarceration. Right this minute, if we talk about black male young adults who never finished high schools, right this minute, 1/4 of those guys are behind bars. It's just become a fact, one of the facts we can depend on, that almost an entire population of young men is locked up. That's kind of our strategy for the ones we can't help in school. Well, we cycle them in and out of jail. Okay, it's about 3/4, well, not quite 3/4, I think more like 2/3 have been in jail at some point in time when they're in that population. So school and basic skills and dispositions that you get when you are successful in school are all things that are going to contribute to cutting this incarceration rate problem. And it's not just schools, it's also homes and communities. We talk about that. Relevance at the high school level in particular. Beginning in late elementary school, a lot of kids just don't know, why am I in school? What's this got to do with life? When am I ever going to use this stuff? Okay, improving schools is going to have to do at least partly with helping young people to understand why they're in school. And we need the business community, we need employers to help us with that piece, and I'll come back around to the employer piece in a minute. But bottom line is that the United States is failing to prepare massive numbers of young people for success in the 21st century. Okay, if we don't do a lot better, we may already have peaked as a nation. Okay, and that's serious, it's real. Okay, when I talk about this Chamber of Commerce conference last week, there were business people from that state, there were business people from the National Chamber of Commerce. They were talking about the fact that we're going to lose massive numbers of skilled people in the baby boom generation. Next 10 or 15 years, we got lots of retirees, and we don't have replacements for them. Okay, we're going to need to find ways fairly rapidly to send a lot of more skilled young people who are trainable into the workplace to help fill some of these slots. Some of them are going to disappear because of the technology changes and so on. But there are going to be a lot of jobs for people who have skills. Even now, business communities reporting places that have lots of unopened jobs next to lots of unemployed people, and they just don't match. and trying to create that match is going to be a major challenge and priority. One quick point on this page, without going through everything, is when we start talking about achievement gaps, we should be trying to help our kids prepare to compete with the rest of the world, not necessarily just with their classmate. And so we often look at gaps of kids in the same school district. I'm suggesting we should stop that for the most part and look at gaps between kids in each group in a particular district and an external benchmark, for example, like the state average for white kids in the whole state. That way we can also look at the white kids in our district and where do they rank relative to the state average for white kids in the whole rank. And their progress can become something that we celebrate and something that we regard as part of the achievement gap discourse. And maybe if they're already above the state average for white kids, we'll take the 75th percentile and take that as a target and track progress toward that. Okay, the way we currently frame the achievement gap work means that white parents and families see nothing. What's in it for us? How are you going to close that racial achievement gap? By holding my kid back or by ignoring them? Okay, so I mean, my favorite school these days is one that not only has narrowed the gap tremendously between its black and Hispanic kids and the state average for whites. They've taken the white kids in their district and moved them past the state average for whites. They started out below it, and they've moved past it. So whites in this district learn more than they would almost anywhere else in the state. And the blacks and Hispanics learn even more than the whites do in the same district. Okay? And so we can have every group in our district be part of the scorekeeping that we do in comparison with external standards. And if we were to close the gap between, for example, black and Hispanic students in Grand Rapids and the state average for white kids, I'd call that closing the gap. Okay, if Grand Rapids black and Hispanic kids on average had the same average score as white kids in the rest of the state, you've closed the racial achievement gap. If the white kids in the district still are ahead, you didn't close that gap, I'm not that worried about that. Okay, because we're competing with the rest of the world. And I think we have to do this in a way that we get buy-in from all the folks in the district, and it's the case that nationally it's in our interest for every group of students to achieve their full potential. When I talk about the white kids falling back in the ranking internationally, that's a potential problem, that's a concern too. So we got to work with everybody. Now, why should we think we can do this? Quickly, the best data we have on test scores for one-year-olds comes from a test called the Bailey test. The nationally representative sample early childhood longitudinal survey, they stimulate the kids in various ways and get their reactions. You do not find differences across groups. It's a bell-shaped curve, but all the curves, the groups are equally represented among each part of the bell-shaped curve. So it looks like our best early childhood measure of intelligence, we're the same at age 1. Okay, the curves split apart by age 3. And the evidence is accumulating. Early childhood life experience is implicated in that, not biology. Okay, so it's not genetically preordained, it's life experience. And we've got to find ways to work with parents to help them give their children the kinds of life experiences that keep them up with the skills that we want them to have. Okay, so the first reason, again, is we're starting from pretty much the same place. Is one reason to think we can do that. The second one, we talk about IQ gaps as if that's the genetic measure. Well, IQ gaps between blacks and whites decreased by 25% between 1972 and 2002. Okay, the IQ for the entire United States population across all racial groups rose by about 17 IQ points during the 21st century. And they had to keep renorming it. It's supposed to have an average of 100 with a standard deviation of 15. They had to keep pulling it back down to renorm it because it was drifting up. Human beings don't change genetically fast enough to produce that big a change in IQ. So it was life experiences, reminding us that IQ tests are skills tests like any other test. There may be a genetic component to performance, but you can't attribute any group level difference to that genetic component. It could be coming from life experience, which I'm suggesting that is the most likely source of it. And so the fact that the IQ have not been stable, they've been drifting, they've been narrowing between groups, suggest again the plausibility of the proposition. These differences are not written in stone. The third point, the National Assessment of Educational Progress from 1971 to 1988 62% of the black-white reading score gap for 17-year-olds disappeared in the name. 62% of a difference people were saying was just genetically anchored. There are names like Shockley and Jensen that some of you may remember that were saying these kinds of things at the end of the 60s, early 70s, and to some degree still are. But the evidence is just mounting up against those ideas. Okay, so the math score gap disappeared by about a quarter or a third reduction over that same period of time. For 9-year-olds, if you look back over the last 20, 30 years, there's been positive drift. The black and Hispanic kids have made more progress than whites, but whites have been going up too. That's the kind of movement we want. All the groups going up, but the groups that are further behind going up faster. So we can kind of meet up at a really high level out in the future. The problem is that our high schools have stagnated, so that even though kids are reaching those higher levels better prepared, they're leaving high school no better prepared than before, because we're doing high school the way we've always done high school. So we're squandering some of the gains that we get at the earlier grade levels. And there's a lot of hustle and bustle and around the country now about how to do different high schools. I even get a little nervous. All the different high school models are out there, but it's going to have a lot of disruption, and good disruption probably in the near future, on just lots of different ways of doing high school. But that's been an issue. And then finally, there are exemplary schools that are showing it can be done in all kinds of communities that are achieving pretty good or very good sometimes gains in all the measures that we care about. So these are all reasons to think that we're not just playing pretend when we talk about excellence with equity. Okay, we can take all of our groups to higher levels. We can do it in ways that have our lower performing groups accelerate and move up. But we have to, it's not going to be easy. That's why it takes a social movement. The actions that will be required are not things that we can pass a law and require people to do. We can't mandate them. There are things that we can inspire people to do. There are things that we can support people to do. There's some incentives that are going to help with this. But it really needs to be a case where we all feel urgency and possibility. A sense of urgency, this just must get done. And we believe it's going to make a difference that we try. If we didn't feel possibility, you just get stressed out with the urgency. Okay? But I'm suggesting to you there are reasons to feel both urgency and possibility. This is a list of distinctions that it's important to make in the context of the movement. Okay, the movement is all the people who feel this sense of urgency and want to be part of the answer as we move together forward. Goals inside the movement, there tend to be a lot of different kinds of goals. If we talk about excellence with equity as one label for the movement, there are people who really want to focus on early childhood. There are other people who want to focus on transition to adulthood. There are other people who think that transition from 3rd to 4th grade is really important as kids stop learning to read and start reading to learn, and they want to get really focused on that. There are just all kinds of distinctions relative to which we can define goals, and it's good that we have that disagreement because it means we spread ourselves across all the work. If everybody wanted to do one thing and thought one thing is most important, that would be more problematic. But we've got lots of goals, we've got disagreements about what's important, that's fine. Civil rights movement, there are lots of disagreement about what the best method was to achieve progress, and each different strategy made a contribution. They tend to be complementary often. So then there are strategies to support the goals. And those strategies are supported by policies that provide the resources and the authorization. Then the work actually happens in programs and projects that are supported by the resources that the policies provide. And then inside those programs and projects, there are principles and practices that characterize how we actually do the work, the spirit in which we do it and the practices to which we do it. And if we're going to be careful and thoughtful and really have not only a sense of urgency and passion, but also do it in a really competent and thoughtful and strategic way, then we need to be asking questions related to each one of these things for every goal that we have. So no matter what the goal is, if it's improving early childhood parenting so the kids reach school more school ready, well, what strategies are we talking about? What policy supports are we going to rely on? What program and project activities do we want to implement and monitor? And what are the principles and practices that we want to see at work in these places and in the efforts that surround those? And I'm suggesting if you answer all those kinds of questions, you'll have a much more coherent approach to things. I came to this list sitting in a community meeting where people were getting frustrated with one another. because they were talking past each other. You know, it was a community development meeting in inner city Boston 15 years ago. And it was the black neighborhoods, Roxbury was the focus of it, and people came together, how can we work to develop our community better? And there were some people there were some corners in their neighborhood that were vacant lots, and they got some project ideas in mind that they've been trying to get people to be interested in for 20 years, and they can't understand why people don't understand. If we could just put a youth development center on this corner, it would make so much difference. There's somebody else who's got some bigger strategic ideas that they're trying to promote. So you can just imagine, I won't keep talking about it, but all the way up and down this thing, all kinds of different ideas at these different levels. And I'm suggesting that they're really complementary, but we need to conduct our discourse and our thought in a way that harvests the complementarity of that and doesn't just make people frustrated because we're all talking past each other. So the emphasis, I argue, there are 5 big circles. That if we could do better in each of these circles and deal with the issues and the distinctions in that triangle with regard to each of those, we'd be way ahead. Parenting, teaching, peer dynamics, employer engagement, and community. And I just want to say a bit about each of these circles. I'm going to go faster than you can take notes for some of you. So and these circles are going to reappear, so you have time to do that. But we'll have to find a way to make the PowerPoint available. I'm not sure where it can be posted, but one way or another, we can make it available. And then there are 2 issues with regard to each of these circles. And I want to argue that there are 2 per circle. Now, I'm actually going to tell you what they are right quick so you can wrap your mind around it. For parenting, authoritative parenting and learning-focused home life. So that's what parents do at home with their kids when nobody else is there and the door is closed. It's not about homeschool engagement. It's not about the relationship between the school and the home. It's about what happens at home in the family. Okay? And there's research that gives us an ideas about what those dynamics, how those dynamics affect achievement and even how they differ some across groups. And we need to get the word out to help people understand what matters there. The second circle for parents is about the homeschool linkages. So if we have the parent-child stuff going well in the home, we've got the relationship with the school, good. Those 2 things would be a big accomplishment to get those done well. For the teaching circle, the 2 are having teachers work together to improve their instruction by watching one another teach and talking about what they see and bringing in other materials to supplement what they already understand, to work together on instruction systematically. That's circle 3. Circle 4 is having teachers study their students' work to understand their students as learners by studying their students' work and on trying to understand the mistakes and what the students' misunderstandings might be behind certain things that they've written. So for teachers, if we could just those 2 things, watch each other teach, discuss what you see, collaborate on trying to refine together what you see as you watch each other teach, and the other is collaborative review of student work, sitting together, looking at what your students have produced, and talking together about how to make that improve. Okay, those 2 things, schools that are doing great, they're usually doing those 2 things. They may do other things too, but those are 2 important things to do. With the peer dynamics, the 2 circles are having kids treat one another in general in ways that free them up to do their best. Right now, we have a peer culture in which kids are afraid to admit that they really care about doing well. They're afraid to admit that they're really trying hard sometime. Okay? And most of them don't like that aspect of their peer culture, but they think it's okay with other people. And they want to fit in with other people. So they do things they don't really want to do in order to fit in, not realizing that most other people don't want to do them either. Okay? They're misreading one another. And so we need to work with that to help them cultivate a peer culture that frees everybody up to admit that they want to do well and to admit when they're actually trying. One of the challenges to getting this done is we have to find ways to protect the egos of kids who are struggling. Because if they admit they're trying and they still aren't doing well, then a natural attribution from some other people might be, well, you just must be stupid. And it's better to look lazy than stupid. So we have a lot of kids pretending to be lazy because they don't want to look stupid. And we've got to find out ways to help them to work through that, to free them up to admit that they want to do well, to admit that they are working hard when they are, and to anticipate that by working hard for a period of time, they're actually going to get smarter, which they will, if they just can suspend their disbelief for long enough to get the work done. Okay, the next circle, the you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circle, is helping kids to work together effectively in cooperative learning groups. We often get the high achievers being intellectual bullies when the teachers assign kids to work together in groups. They put the low achievers down, and the low achievers come out of it feeling even more worthless than when they sat down with their colleagues. Okay, we've got to find ways to get people, all the kids, to support and build one another up and believe in one another when they work together in cooperative learning groups. The 7th circle on employers is employer engagement of a form that helps kids to generate images of possible selves. So we need employers in various ways going into schools to give kids ideas about who they could become and what it's going to take to become that. The 8th circle is about employment opportunities for parents and apprenticeships for kids. So ways to just that, employment. The 9th circle is community-based supports for parents and families. Okay, all the various kinds of social services and other things that parents often need to fill the gap, to do things that they can't easily do for themselves. And then the 10th circle is just places to belong and fit in and feel like you're part of a community. Okay, we've often got folks who are low income, who are unemployed, who are sitting home by themselves all day watching soap operas and often feeling kind of worthless. They need a way to get up and go someplace else and be with some other people who can say, yeah, I'm experiencing some of that too, and we're not worthless, we can do better, and here's what we can do, and let's work together on this. Those 10 circles, okay, I'm arguing you can kind of wrap your mind around those, and they capture a lot about what we care about when we talk about these movements. And so if we can just, each of us, find whatever levers we can reach from where we stand. People often ask, well, which is the most important? Well, that's kind of an important question, but for each of us as an individual, we might not even be able to reach the lever that's most important. Okay? For us, there's certain things that are within our reach. So the question is, among the things that you can actually touch and do something about, where is your impact likely to be greatest? And each of us has to answer that question on our own. All these things are important. If you diminish any of them too much, it throws the whole thing out of balance. Okay? And at any point in time, the balance will be different from what it would be at another point in time, so the priorities about what's most important to do right now will shift over time. But for each of us, we have a certain set of opportunities to contribute, and if we can get lots of people searching for their own opportunities and all differentially positioned, then we can get a lot of stuff covered as part of a movement like this. Now, the PowerPoint has, I spell out those 10 circles and throw some data in between the circles to illustrate some of it. So I'm going to clip through and stop on some things and clip past other things as I go through this. So this is when the learning-focused home life up here. See, authoritative parent and learning-focused home life. Authoritative parenting has to do with being high on warmth and responsiveness, and also high on structure and demandingness. Okay? So there's 2 dimensions of the parent-child relationship. One is my child is trying to figure, if I've got something I want to talk to my mom about, will she listen to me? Particularly if we don't agree about what it is we want to talk about. Does she like to sit and talk to me and spend time with me? Does she tell me regularly and show me regularly that she really loves me and wants me around and so on? Okay. The other dimension is structure, that there are rules in our household. And I understand the rules, I understand why they are what they are, and I know we do not cross those boundaries. There's a lot of freedom inside the boundaries, but there are boundaries. And the households that are high on having the right kind of rules with clear boundaries and being warm and responsive are the ones that get the highest achievement levels. They're the ones also where the young people learn to advocate for themselves because they learn to be respected by adults and to really expect and even insist that the adults listen and treat them with respect, and so on. The kids who are just ordered around learn to be obedient, but as soon as they get out from their parents' view, then they go a bit wild sometimes. They also don't take initiative as much as they should because they're used to just being ordered around. Okay? There are racial differences in the propensity to do these things. As black folks, there was a point in time where our kids had to obey authority figures instantly without question. It was a survival skill. Okay, there were times in the South where an authority figure tell you to do something, you don't do it, he could shoot you dead or do something else harmful to you and pay no penalty for it. So you had to be quickly obedient, and it was a survival skill to teach our kids. Okay, now if we still teach our kids that same way, we're just teaching them to be subordinate workers in somebody else's business. Okay, we're not teaching them to advocate for themselves and to expect respect from people in higher positions. Okay, some people look at that and say, well, you're talking about we got to parent white. I said, no, I'm not saying we got to parent white. We got to parent in ways that help our kids to realize their full potential. And there's a discussion we need to have in the black community about parenting styles that serve our own best interests, no matter who else they might fit. I've got a colleague, Jelani Mandara, who's a professor at Northwestern, who went into parenting research to find the optimal black parenting style. Okay, what he found was that for the most part, it's the same as the optimal white parenting style, which is not the answer he wanted, but it's the answer that he found. There are some things that black parents need to do differently in terms of preparing our kids for the way the world is going to treat them. Okay, so if I got a black male teenage son, I've got to tell him the cops, if I give him my nice car, he's going to get stopped by the police, and they're not going to believe him when he says this is my daddy's car. And he's got to respond in a way that doesn't get himself arrested. Or he should expect that when he goes into stores, people are going to follow him around suspecting he's going to steal something, and he's got to respond in a way that is healthy. Okay? But in terms of things like high responsiveness and warmth, coupled with high demandingness, it works pretty much the same way for the different groups, as do a number of the other things that we can talk about. And both within and across groups, these things matter as part of what we got to get the word out about, okay, and put supports in place. Now, the learning-focused home life, leisure reading, for example, is among the things we care about. And that's why this chart here, you'll see 5 dots in each piece. Those are grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade. The height of the dot off of the horizontal axis is the percentage of kids in the particular group that agrees I read at home almost every day. In other words, they said yes instead of maybe or no to those items. And we distinguish the ones who say school is difficult for me versus the ones who say school is not difficult for me. For black kids, and for all the groups, you'll see at first grade, which is the first dot in the series, they're all pretty much in the same range between 60 and 70% saying they read every day at home. But then as they go on, we get the splits coming up. So for black kids for whom school is difficult and not, we get a big drop-off. For white kids who say school is difficult, we get a drop-off, but not so much for the kids who say school is not difficult. For Asian kids who say school is difficult, we get a drop-out. But for Asian kids who say school is not difficult, we get an increase in reading at home. Then this is Native American kids. This is Hispanic kids. That's kids who checked off more than one racial identity, multiracial kids over there. Okay, skill comes from time on task. And the groups that are spending more time doing learning activities are getting more practice, and that's going to be part of the basis for the skill differences that we see later on. So learning-focused home life is part of this kind of thing. This is 30,000 kids from schools across, I think about 8 states where we've surveyed kids. And these kinds of patterns we find pretty much everywhere that we survey. Homeschool linkages I mentioned, teachers, methods and routines for observing, refining teaching, for team-based review of student work. These are just some of the ways that we talk about effective teaching, these various dimensions of teaching that I won't spend time on right now. Caring, controlling, clarifying, challenging, captivating, conferring, consolidating. We have multiple measures for each of these, and the way that students answer questions about these predict how much other students taught by the same teachers learn over time. Okay, so we survey classrooms, ask kids to rate their experience of being taught in one classroom. We've got a big project with the Gates Foundation, 33,000 classrooms. We take those data from the students and look at whether they predict how much kids learn in other classes taught by the same teacher. And it's big effects. It's about 4.8 months difference in math skills comparing the 25th percentile teacher versus the 75th percentile teacher in terms of the students' ratings on these things. So you got one classroom where the teachers agree, yeah, my teacher seems to care, and she keeps the classroom in orderly and under control, and It's really good at clearing up our confusion and pushes us to think hard and work hard and makes it kind of interesting and talks to us and elicits our opinion and then ties it all together in ways that all make sense, in ways I can remember it. And we got another class where the kids say the opposite of that. Well, it doesn't really seem to care. The class is always out of control, and when we get confused, it really doesn't get cleared up. But she really doesn't seem to care that much about whether we understand it. And it's boring, but we got to be there. And she never cares what we think about anything, and just disorganized, and class ends, and we go not knowing what happened. Those two classes are going to have very different learning outcomes. Okay. The class differences, if we take the bottom 10%, which is what this one is about, the bottom 10% classroom at about 1,260 classrooms in one big urban school district, and ask about all the answers we got to all the 7 C's questions in one classroom, in any particular classroom, how many of those answers were agreement responses? So questions about all those 7 C's I just talked about, how many favorable responses did we get? What percentage favorable? If you take the bottom 10% of the classrooms, only about 25% of the responses were favorable. So 75% of the responses said, nope, our classroom is not living up to those 7 C's. If you take the bottom 10% of the classrooms. Take the top 10%, it's up there between 70 and 80% of the kids are saying, yep, our classroom lives up to those conditions. So we've got huge differences between classrooms. This is each spike here, the height of the spike is a level of favorable response, the agreement level in a particular classroom. So these are math classes in a middle school. Here, the bottom one is about 28% of the kids agree in this math class. Same school, same kinds of kids, same subject as a class where 81% of the kids agree. So lots of variation within school, within each subject, in how students report agreement on whether their teachers seem to care and keep the class under control and clear up confusion and make things challenging and interesting and interactive and coherent. Okay. The little kids can answer these kinds of questions too. This is the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Each little bitty bar, there are like 244 bars here. The height of each little bitty bar is a classroom and a level of agreement. The little kids answer yes, maybe, and no on these. So these are percentage yeses. And we just see lots of variation there. And so those third and fourth circles, teachers working together to improve their instruction, studying their students' work, there is room for improvement in pretty much every school we've ever surveyed. There are usually some that they're high, and they could be higher at the top end, and there's some that are much lower. And getting people to work together on improving instruction can change these pictures. Okay, and that's part of what the movement needs to be about. This is just showing that the higher kids rate their teachers on those 7 C's, the happier they are. Things like this class is a happy place to be. Okay, the more they agree, my teacher seems to believe in my ability. Those kinds of things. So there's a lot there that we're going to move past. I've told you a little bit about this. I'm going to click past those quickly. The peer norms, conspiracy to succeed, the cultural learning, cooperative learning, I mentioned a little bit of that. You get past that a little bit. This is just, the length of each of these bars has to do with how much teasing there is. This is elementary schools, biracial group. The dark blue bar is teasing for making mistakes. The gray bar is teasing for being smart. Teasing for making mistakes is a particular problem because it makes kids nervous. Okay, I worry I might not do as well as other classmates. Everybody agrees more with that in classrooms that have more teasing for making mistakes. Nervousness interferes with concentration, which then interferes with learning. And so the peer dynamics, beginning in first grade actually. Beginning in first grade, there's too much teasing. And then it just continues all the way through elementary school. This is secondary school. The shorter aqua bars are classrooms that are majority white kids. The teasing goes up from 6th to 7th, plateaus at 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, and then comes down 11th and 12th grade. On the other hand, the taller bars up here are classrooms that are fewer than 25% white, vast majority students of color. Teasing is high, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and then tails off as you go past that. So there are different patterns of youth culture in different places. And this peer dynamic has lots of angles to it that if we work on those more effectively, I think we can free kids up to do their best. They can be worried less. They're going to be admitting when they need help and not holding back and asking for help. There are a number of benefits there to be gotten. In the surveys that we do, we measure student engagement and dispositions in several different ways. This social beliefs and feelings, whether they're feeling anxious and alienated and insecure. Social goals and behaviors, whether they're misbehaving, holding back from doing their best, avoiding help when they need it, or hiding effort, pretending they're not trying even when they are trying. Academic goals and behaviors, persistence, mastery goals, effort, help-seeking behaviors. Academic beliefs and feelings, sense of efficacy, sense of happiness, sense of satisfaction. Those are, I care about everything on this page, okay? And we measure everything on this page and can talk about how it's predicted by the 7 C's of effective instruction and how it's predicted by other things that we can talk about. And so we're talking about creating conditions where students can engage with, I won't say engage with abandon in their studies, but fully engage and not feel like they got to hold back and hide it by working on all these various dimensions. The conspiracy to succeed notion is just about trying to organize young people to undermine those aspects of their own culture that get in the way of learning. Because we can document from some of the surveys that they don't like those aspects, but they feel like they got to live with it, and as individuals, they feel like there's nothing they can do about it. That's why they're saying, even if I can't and you can't, maybe we can if we work together on this, and that's part of the aspiration with this conspiracy to succeed. I know the print is small, but this big a screen, you can probably actually see this in the back. So we asked them what are some things that other kids do so that students will like them. And most of the stuff is negative that students do, that they list. This was an open-ended response, open-ended question on a little survey. Please list some things that students at your school do so that other students will like them. Now, this top category is just things that were vague enough that were hard to classify. But as soon as you get down here, and the percentage is the percentage of students that gave responses in those categories. All right? And so we see antisocial behavior like fighting, cursing, indifference, academically disruptive, copying other people, being peer pressure, just a lot of negative stuff. Then we ask them, if you could decide what's cool, what would you have be cool? What would the rules be that you would set for what cool is? And what we see is it's pretty much the same list their parents would have written and that their teachers would have written. Okay? Work ethic, trying hard in school, going to class, being responsible, following rules. Social qualities like being nice, respecting others, being fun, caring about family and friends, respecting yourself. Their parents and teachers could have written the same list. So these were kids from a number of different middle schools and high schools that contributed to this. And so why would they put up with a social culture in which kids are doing all those negative things in order to get attention from their friends if what most of them would like to have is this positive culture? Because they even asked them, what would you make not cool? And we got this list, the antisocial qualities, the academic disruptive stuff. Okay? But they want to fit in with people. And so they think everybody else kind of likes it when you're a bit off task in class and when you're acting like you don't really care. And so you don't want to be thought to be sucking up to the teacher or be, various other things that they call one another. So they're trying to fit in. And we need to help them work with this. Again, some people look at the responses when they give us answers like all these, what they would like to make cool, and say, oh, we can't believe that. Okay? They're just so convinced by the kids' negative behaviors that the kids really like it, that they're not willing to grant the plausibility of the proposition, that most of them really would like to have it a different way. Okay. Now, in order to get it to be a different way, we, as I think I intimated earlier, we're going to have to find ways to make it safe for our lowest achievers, for our struggling learners, to admit that they really want to do well. Okay. We don't want to have them take the risk that their failure, when they step out on the limb and say that they really do want to do well and really have tried, that we don't want them to have to take the risk that their failure will be attributed to stupidity. Okay? So we've got to work through that. But if we can work through that and free them up to step out and get the school community to believe in them and to support them, that could be a change maker. I watched Marva Collins methods in the early 1990s. Some of you know how many know who Margaret Collins is? Okay, for those of you who don't, she was an African-American teacher in inner city Chicago whose methods weren't really welcome in the public schools, so she left and set up the West Side Academy, which is a private school, served kids in the projects in New York, and she did things with poor inner city kids that people thought couldn't be done with poor inner city kids. And in her classrooms, everybody rooted for everybody else. It was like a learning community, really, and nothing else would be tolerated than that. And she taught them that we've started at different places. Some people have more catching up to do, but everybody in here can be a great person, and the world needs you to be a great person. One of the things that she did that was special was any reprimand was followed up with positive reinforcement. It's, what you did, the president of IBM would never be caught doing, and we need you to be eligible or among the people who we can count on to have positions like that. So I don't want to see it done again because what you did is inconsistent with who you are. Okay, those kinds of positive reinforcement. She authorized the class to break into a chant to praise a student who did something that was unusually good for them. We like the way you do it, and you're very, very bright. Cum laude, très bien, you're the crème de la crème, was a chant that she would actually teach her kids. And they could, without permission, just spontaneously break into it to give positive reinforcement to other kids in their class. And that kind of thing I'm suggesting we need to get back to. This is just a list of what are the most important kinds of success we ask students. And most of what they listed was very myopic. Things like just basically being a good kid and doing what adults want you to do. It's not till you get down here where leadership and doing things that benefit society as a whole and benefiting your community, things that are really inspiring as aspirations to going out and making a positive difference. So when I talk about possible selves, we need to get kids these images, let them know that they can actually change their communities if they want to. There's a project that sends kids out with cameras to, and I'm blanking on the name of it. Pardon? No, it's not Photo Voice, but apparently that's another one. This one is out of DC, but it's spreading out some other places. They send kids out with cameras. The kids take pictures of things that concern them in the community, things that they want to change. They write essays around their pictures. They do presentations to school boards and mayors and other people, and they have made differences. Okay, it'll come to me, the name of this one. So we need to help kids understand that. The possible selves, I mentioned, there's a program in Boston called They Made It, So Can I. Takes folks in the 5th grade classrooms. Did I say this already? I don't think I did. No. It takes people in the 5th grade classrooms to tell their life stories beginning in 5th grade. And they say that when people start telling their life story beginning in 5th grade, their insecurities from 5th grade start coming out in their faces. And the kids can relate to it. And they start to tell, about the bully or about not feeling smart when they move to a new school or just all the different things that happen. And then they tell their life story coming forward and all the challenges they overcame and the way education played a role and just all of it. And so if you imagine every month or two having somebody come through 5th grade classrooms and tell their life story, and it could be, the mailman one week, a stay-at-home mother another week, a brain surgeon another week, just coming through telling their life story. Through 6th grade, through 7th grade, kids are developing whole repertoires of possible selves. They're developing understandings of the kinds of challenges that life will tend to pose for you and some of the strategies that people have used to overcome those. And these images of possible selves can be motivational enough to help them persist when they want to give up or to help them make choices when there are critical choices to be made. The apprenticeships and jobs would be important. I don't need to linger on that. And this actually, for the employer piece, we have a report called the Pathways to Prosperity that you can get on our website for the Achievement Gap Initiative website. And just let me give you that. The web address is agi.harvard.edu. AGI stands for Achievement Gap Initiative.harvard.edu. Some of the survey data that I'm talking about comes from the Tripod Project. That website is tripodproject.org. But on the AGI website, under What's New, there's the Exemplary High Schools study, there's the Pathways to Prosperity report, there's other things that you can find there. There are more than 150 videos of research-based presentations on achievement and achievement gap issues. A few weeks from now, There'll be about 24 more videos on parenting issues. We had a parenting conference at the end of June. Okay. And so it's a rich resource to use, and it's going to get richer as it tries to be a resource for the movement to help to bridge from research to practice. This is the 5th and 6th grade stuff I was just talking about. This kind of just summarizes that here. 7th and 8th grade, starting to take kids into businesses behind the scenes so they can see what the business sites actually look like, talk to people behind the scenes. 9th and 10th grade, employers sending people into schools to talk about career options and career strategies and so on. 11th and 12th grade, more work learning integration, more apprenticeships and those kinds of things. At the community college level, much richer integration of school and work than we often achieve these days. And then kids being sent from there into finishing 4-year degrees or going off into the world of work. And so it's a scaffolded series of engagements and exposures to possible selves and the world of work that we need to find ways to put together for kids as a society. And as we put them together, there's some basic ideas of what it's going to take. One is we're going to have the senior, most influential people in our regions come on board and say, we got to do this. Okay? People who have what I call elite social capital. Their name recognition, skills, personalities to cultivate a sense of urgency and a sense of possibility. Okay, as we work there. So we're talking about the CEOs of major corporations, of their foundations, of our school systems, our elected officials, our university presidents, college presidents, all the folks who are decision makers and affect resource flows need to come together and say they don't have to run it, but they do need to put something in place. Intermediary organizations that are the engines that drive this work, not direct service delivery organizations, but organizations that keep track of whether everything else is in place that we need and that influence resource flows. And there will be problems with people who are community-based thinking it's too top-down. But then we got to do the politics to add the bottom-up and the middle-out pieces to that. But without the folks at the top who really control the resources saying this will be done and we will allocate the resources, it's just there's not going to be the resources to make it happen. There will be politics, there will be tension, but there's no way around that. You got to do the politics. Okay. Then instigators. Every one of us in this room can be an instigator. We don't have to control any resources. Just has to have some ideas and willing to step up and say something to somebody if we've got a good idea. Then dedicated staff that are among the most talented people in the region need to be in these intermediary engines. Okay, people who other people respect, who have got all those skills. So we get loaned executives from the corporate sector. We don't want the person that they don't need anymore in the office. We want the person they don't want to give up. Give us your favorite problem solver to come over here and help run this engine to drive this agenda in the region. Then clear central themes with compelling facts so that they become the common language for the region. So you can't move around your city without running into these themes at your workplace and in your shopping places and in your doctor's offices and on the public service announcements on TV and all these things. Just let us know we're all part of something special that's changing, that's moving along. Then streamline a coherent curriculum for the change process. So people are being asked to do things that they don't know how to do in this. So we're talking about all these themes that we're going to live out in this common language. Well, how do you do that? So we need curriculum materials that are appropriate for folks who need to learn how to do things a little bit differently, including parents and teachers and supervisors on employment sites and so on. A lot of our young people get a job and bomb out because their supervisor isn't that skilled at handling young folks. And so we need that kind of thing to be done. Then organizational structures and personnel with the capacity to teach and motivate adults. So we got the curriculum, but we have to have sites where they actually learn it. Okay. And we need to organize ourselves in ways that it's difficult for individuals to avoid the change process. Keep running into it. People keep asking you about what you're doing to contribute. They're giving you a hard time and you aren't doing anything. And so just having it be difficult for folks not to be engaged and being a part of progress. Patient but tough accountability. Give people time to learn, be supportive, be encouraging, but after a point in time, if it's still not working, help them find something that fits them better and move somebody else in there who can get the job done. whatever the job is, if it's important. Okay, we have to be willing to look at things and say that's not good enough. And let's work together to improve it. And if whoever we've got working on it right now is unable or unwilling to improve it fast enough, then let's work together to put somebody else in that job, be respectful of whoever we're moving out, but there's something better for folks to do often. Okay. Institutional data gathering on young people. The idea of a regional registry where young people can sign up and have their progress tracked from their mid-teens into early adulthood so that the leaders in the region can know what the status of things is. How many of our young people have applied for jobs? In what sectors did they apply? How many were accepted? When they were turned down for jobs, what kinds of reasons were they given? How many are planning to go back to school? What kinds of careers are they going to be interested in when they go back to schools? Just all kinds of things that help us to do assessment of where we stand and planning for where we want to go. We can track with with the regional registry kind of thing. And then if we collect the data, we've got to use it. Data-driven decision-making and transparency. Using it for reporting out, for celebrating progress, for just managing our way through the big major transition that we need to go through. And then finally, community involvement resources. Inviting everybody to find their place in this. There's something for everybody to do. There's ways for everybody to feel like they're part of what's happening here. And this is just a schematic for thinking about the organizational structure of it. You have the powerful regional leadership. You have the quasi-public intermediary organizations, or its major engines that do all those things I was talking about. I say private or quasi-public because if they become viewed as sort of the initiative or agenda of any one politician, then they can't be endorsed by that politician's adversaries. So if a mayor says, oh, it's the mayor's initiative for such and such, or the mayor's quasi-public, or the mayor's intermediate organization, then the next person who wants to run against the mayor can't very easily step up and praise it and support it. He's got to fight it often. Okay? So we need institutions that are, not, if not politically neutral, at least politically shared, where everybody has a stake and feels some sense of responsibility for it to stay in business and to be supported and to work effectively. And that kind of stuff where we keep up with the gaps and we document and monitor performance and formal and informal accountability is enforced. That kind of system can improve the quality of what happens in the frontline organizations that work with kids, both the scope and scale of what happens and the quality of it. So it's how much of it and how good is it. All that can be affected if we've got this intermediate organization that's kind of keeping track and advising and helping things to run well. And again, there are going to be politics around it. There's going to be people who think some other people have too much influence. But I'd rather have that fight than have nothing happening. Okay. And then all these things, if they can work well, lead to better post-secondary outcomes for young people. Okay. And so that is these two green circles. And the community-based stuff, we won't talk through in any additional detail. But if we can just do this, I think it can make a difference. You can kind of wrap your mind around those 5 circles because they're all familiar. And each of the 2 things off of each circle, if it's not familiar, it's not that strange either. You can kind of say, yeah, that would probably make a difference. Okay? So let me open it up. I'm going to finish with a poem just before we stop, but let me just invite any comments, questions. I guess it's usually routine at this point to say, please don't make long speeches, just so we can keep plenty of time for lots of people to get a bit of airtime. Back here.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. The central question to me in the room is trust.
Yes.
In a society where you have teachers living in one community and low-income African-American Hispanics in another community driving in, nothing in this says anything about trust. And I'll just make one commentary. You know, I grew up part of my life in the South, and that's not to romanticize it, but I grew up with all black teachers who, for whatever the reasons, gave me a sense of confidence and trust in myself. When we moved to Chicago, that was a whole different animal when and teachers were coming from different communities with lower expectations of their students sometimes. So we need to talk about that level of how do we don't live in a post-racial society, so how do we talk about that trust? And that's a particular factor for this community.
Okay. Yeah, I pay quite a bit of attention to that, but I don't make assumptions about what the racial patterns are. I actually measure them. Okay. So in the survey work we do, we have racial identifiers for the teachers and the students, and then we look at patterns in there. And actually, I just did it today because the issue came up earlier today. So I looked at correlations between the teacher's race and what the teacher says about their students, and you get virtually no difference. There is no correlation here, for the most part, between the teacher's race and what the teacher reports about the students. I often also tend to find that students across racial groups have the same opinion of the teacher as one another. The adults tend to worry a lot more about the race of the teacher than the kids do. What kids want to know, the kids want to see somebody who looks like them, who's respected and important. So if you ask about the teacher, what the kids say, they want the teacher who cares and delivers. And if they get a teacher who cares and delivers, then great. If they don't, that's a problem. But they also want to know that somebody like them can be important. They want to see somebody who looks like them come in and other people look up to them and treat them with respect. Okay? So in general, during the times when a lot of us grew up, the race dynamic was a bit different than it is now. It's also regionally very different in terms of people's experiences. And when you start finding the subtle differences in terms of teacher effectiveness by identity, it's both race and class that starts to come in. Okay? And so there's some interesting study. There's one study that I have in mind in inner city Baltimore, where all the kids are poor. They're black or white, but they're almost all black and white, and they're poor. And so the most effective teachers at raising the achievement among poor inner city white kids in Baltimore are black teachers whose daddies were professionals. They're the least effective at raising achievement among the first grade black kids. Okay. The most effective teachers at raising achievement among the first grade black kids were the white teachers whose daddies were professionals and the black teachers whose daddies were not, whose daddies were blue collar. Okay. And so there is social distance on several different dimensions here as it matters. And we tend to find in some of the data sometimes there's small racial differences in behavior management. In some of the data we looked at, all racial groups of kids view the black teachers as slightly better at managing behavior. Okay. But in general, I think it's an empirical question by empirical question, I mean the facts are what they are, about what difference it makes what the racial background of the teachers is. And in the data I've looked for, some of the survey work we've done here, just very preliminary stuff, I'm not seeing it's that different. Now, it's not always that great, but it's pretty similar. And so I think our main goal with regard to exposure for the kids ought to be that they ought to know that people like them can be big shots, can be important, even if it's not their teacher. And so that they made it so can I kind of thing I talked about. We need people coming in beginning in 5th grade who can model that kind of importance to the kids. And not that they all have to be high-level professionals. They can just be a really proud mail carrier who comes in and has put a great life together without a whole lot of money. Because our low achievers have to know that if it's true that I'm going to struggle academically for a long time, I still got to believe there's a place in the world for me. And I need people to come in and say, I didn't do that well in school, and I hated school, actually, most of it, but I've got a great life, and describe that. You want to call on people or say? That's what we all say.
I'm Brooke Davis. I'm a social worker for Wyoming Public Schools, and this part I can get. The question that I guess I have is technology and how technology is affecting our students of color as well as our white students. I do not have Facebook. I'm not a component of Facebook, but there has to be some value in the upcoming technology and how it affects our kids and our learning and the gaps in achievement that they're facing right now. So
turns out most kids have computers at home. They don't all have parents who know how to use them. Pardon?
If they don't have one, they can find one.
And they don't have one, they can find it. People are talking about using computer programs that are individually tailored to the kids. now. I mean, there's some math programs that are having good experience where the computer will figure out what your level of proficiency is and give you appropriate questions to help scaffold the progress that goes through. So there are potential learning benefits of the technology. Now, on the other hand, there are also some effects of the technology where our kids are just interacting technologically and maybe not developing the same social skills. People are working on that. I'm not totally up to speed on what's happening with that, and I'm of a generation, or maybe that's just I'm making excuses, but I'm not totally up to speed on what the technology is even that some of our kids are using and what the possibilities. I agree with you. It's an elephant in the room. We need to understand the potential both for good and for not so good, which means that some of us who would prefer not to tune in probably have a responsibility to learn a bit more about it. So I don't have a really great answer for you. There are, though, a few studies that suggest that playing games does have some beneficial effects for kids, particularly if they're the right kinds of games. It's interesting. In the parenting piece, I kind of jumped over things I could have told you about early childhood parenting. One of the most interesting things about early childhood parenting is more and more people are using games with their toddlers to help teach math intuition, sense of ordinality, and so on. And we need to help everybody have access to those games for the toddlers. The most interesting thing from our parent conference, which is not about games, I'm just throwing it in here because I think it's interesting, was about gesturing, is teaching your toddlers to point and use their hands to express themselves before they can talk. And gesturing accelerates language development among infants. And so there are a number of little nuggets like this that came out of the conference that we did on parenting a few weeks ago that we want to try to package and push out so people can share them with others. But yeah.
If you have a question, would you just raise your hand so I can get a little bit of a game going on?
Dr. Ferguson, 3 real quick observations. So, and your response.
Found a spelling mistake.
No. Teachers right now are under assault.
Yes.
Their working conditions,
Right.
Wages, working conditions, and their very existences of unions, that's under assault in this model. Or not in your model, but in reality. Parents are overworked, many of them underpaid, overworked, overpressured. Communities are being dismantled by some of the very forces, economic forces, capitalism, dismantle and work against some of the very positive things within your model. I'll just stop there and let you respond to a few of those things.
We got to deal with kids where they live. They live in their homes with their parents, in the classrooms with their teachers, and we can't back away from that. We can't deny that. There are things that parents and teachers can do with no new money, just with some ideas and some new commitments to get it done. There's nothing more important for predicting child development than teachers and parents, okay? Teachers can take it as an assault, but they're teaching our kids, okay? And it needs to be a joint endeavor for us collectively. We're grateful that they've chosen to spend their careers that way and to dedicate their lives to that work, but they also can't just close the door and say, this is my classroom, you stay out, I'm gonna do it my way. No, it's our classroom, okay? And so there's gotta be both support and press, okay? We have to express our total respect, but we also have to press. In any relationship, they're gonna be both parts of that. I think we need to learn as much as we can from the most effective people in all the different roles, including teaching, okay? The charts that I showed you that had those huge differences in how kids rate the quality of what they experience in classes, okay? The bottom tail of that is not acceptable, okay? And you can say that teachers who are rated really low are under assault, or you can say that we've identified that so we can work on it, so we can help them to improve over time. And if it turns out that they can't, then we need to help them understand that there may be a career that's going to work better for them, okay? And so I do agree that the way we do business sometimes, the way we talk about it can be insulting and condescending. we've got to do the politics, push back and say, what you just said is insulting and condescending, okay? And we go back about that. And I think the organized labor for teachers is becoming enlightened these days. They know that the world is changing. They know that there's going to be people pressing for measures of effectiveness and accountability, and whether they like it or not, it's coming. It's going to happen. I can tell you, like 3 or 4 years from now, it's going to be, we're going to have multiple measures administered multiple times per year over 2 or 3 years, and then those data are going to be used to make decisions about tenure and those kinds of things. There are going to be multiple ways of scoring what people see when they observe classrooms. There are going to be questionnaires that get at professional knowledge. There are going to be student surveys that get at what students say about that. It's going to happen a couple times per year probably with these things over multiple times, so that no one instance of being measured will be that threatening, because you know it's going to be averaged in a lot of others, so one time can't make that much difference. But it's going to be all put together. There are people working on this very hard. The Gates Foundation project is working on it. There are other people who are working on it. And so I think that's the direction that we're going in, because we're at a place where if teachers and parents can't help us raise the bar a lot, we're in trouble as a nation, okay? We just got to get it done. And your hands seem to have a little urgency to it, but okay, he goes first and then go on.
Okay, I'd just like to make a comment without belaboring the point on a comment about most of the children have computers. It depends upon the age and the group. And I did a study 2 years ago, Michigan Family Resources that controls Kent County Head Start. The majority of the students did not have computers or access to them, and I just want to make that comment just for what it's worth, because there are some particular
This is preschoolers? Or?
Preschoolers, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
My question is, when you were talking about the 7 C's of effective instruction, I personally took it and interpreted it as being effective and affective. Could you speak to effective and affective instruction as it relates to the 7 C's?
Affective is another dimension of outcome. It's another domain where we care about the outcome. Effectiveness has to do with whether you do better on whatever outcome you're targeting. Okay? Standardized test scores are not the only thing we care about. Okay? I paid money to have my kid be happy at the end of the day, too. Okay? And to have, remember the page that we had, all those, come back to, I think it's not too far behind this, okay? This stuff is all affective. A lot of it is, and we measure those things. And the 7 C's also help to predict those, okay? So if you've got a teacher who seems to care, who keeps the class orderly, who clears up confusion, who pushes kids to think hard and work hard, who makes it interesting and stimulating, who invites the kids to contribute and talk in the conversation, who tries to knit it all together so it's coherent, which is all the 7 C's, you get better outcomes on these kinds of things. Also, I don't tend to use the phrase cultural competence that much because people use it all kinds of ways. But we do need to be very sensitive to who our kids are. We need to scaffold it for them. So there's a page that's not in here where I take each of the 7 C's and I describe what culturally competent implementation of that C would look like all the way through. Okay? So you're paying attention to what's going to make sense and compute for the kinds of kids that you're working with each of those 7 C's. Okay, how you get control in a classroom depends upon what the kids are used to at home for how the mommy and daddy get control in the household. You may not do it the same way, but you need to be kind of conscious of it so you can calibrate to be sure that you're communicating clearly and kids know what you're talking about. So that kind of thing is in the way of thinking about this. But effectiveness is, what do you care about being effective on that? And I doubt that we'd disagree very much about what those dimensions are. Okay, right. Yeah, it's in there, and it matters. And I think it's important to point out that it matters. And I actually think, well, with the measures of teaching effectiveness, it's not quite a done deal that the affective measures are going to be in the composite. Okay, I think the value-added test score gains are going to be in there. Student judgments about effectiveness of instruction, about the 7 C's are probably going to be in there. The classroom observational evaluations from supervisors and others are probably going to be in there. But questions about whether your kids feel a certain way, whether they come out with a high sense of efficacy, may or may not be in there, and that's something that we need to figure out how we want to think about that. Yes.
My hand went up. You've mentioned the Gates Foundation a couple of
Yes,
times,
right.
and the top-down, that's a reality, which I understand. I'm an educator, and I've had the opportunity to be at the Gates Foundation. And I would say overall, those people that are coming from the top are extremely naive in terms of what we actually deal with in the classroom. For example, you had said that the majority of children have parents. Well, in my classrooms, they don't. They don't have parents.
Did I say the majority of people had parents?
You said that they have the parents, they have their teachers.
The majority of children have some adult who is their caretaker, who is often a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt. But there's somebody in that role, which is who I'm talking about.
Right, and I guess like with all of this,
Yeah.
I just got back from D.C., saw Matt Damon at the SOS conference. CNN, put Matt Damon up, and there are 1,000 teachers there, and didn't interview one. We are not listening to the teachers. And in terms of the dynamics, there are a lot of things that sound wonderful in theory, but when you go in, for example, just even having individuals come in each week, well, we have to account for our hours. 1 week is taken with the standardized testing, 3rd grade on up. And the Gates Foundation, I said, hey, let's get your statistics. What are your statistics? Because the majority of the workers, I have very close friends that have worked there and still are, but are children of privilege. They're sending their children to the private schools. So I think we have to really get down to some of those ugly realities that may not fit so well into.
Well, let me respond to you. I'm one of those Gates Foundation people. And so you can tell me what it is you think I don't understand about this. My surveys, my student surveys, are the centerpiece of the classroom measure in that. The team of people who are working on this are close colleagues of mine, okay, who do get into schools, who do listen to teachers. I think I've probably talked to more teachers and more administrators about teaching than most teachers have, okay. We also collect a ton of data. We have hundreds of thousands of people that we've surveyed and looked at the patterns in a way that no individual educator would ever be able to see, because they see from where they sit, and what they can see is totally valid from where they sit. But the generalizations that you would reach on that, you need a different kind of exposure to talk about. So I think I understand the angst that somebody would feel if they were playing a role and it seems like all the conversation is pointing at them and saying it's your fault things aren't any better, and where a lot of it doesn't acknowledge a lot of the real concerns that you have. And you read into that people don't understand or hear those concerns. But often we actually do understand and hear those concerns, or at least we hear them and we can debate about how much we understand them. Okay, but it's through this kind of exchange. Okay, I've been working in schools for about 12 years now, going in and out and getting pushback and dealing with resistance of various kinds, dealing with patterns where people feel respected or not, okay? And there are lots of things that go on in schools that contribute to the frustration. We've not, over time, sorted it out well enough to do better. I think we're getting to the point now where we know we have to sort it out better. I think one of the patterns that you're going to see a lot more of is people trying to identify those schools where almost everybody agrees, yeah, it's going great here. And not by the numbers, by the affective pieces from the students and the teachers, and go in and see what leadership looks like in those particular schools. See how teachers are part of the leadership in those particular schools. See how the responsiveness of the environment is structured so that everybody feels like they've got a voice and that they are part of the change process. And so it's going to be, there are some things that I know feel like they're coming totally top-down and in a totally not consultative way. I want to suggest to you it's a lot more consultative than you can see. It's individuals. The Gates Project has 6 different protocols for scoring what observers see when they observe classrooms. Those 6 different protocols have been developed by 6 different teams of researchers working with schools for over the last decade, in and out of schools, seeing what teachers are doing and why they're doing it and what seems to make the most difference. And this particular project is bringing all that stuff together under one umbrella, saying, let's sort it out and let's figure out what predicts what in this. Which of the things that we observe in the protocols actually tell us which classrooms are going to get the bigger achievement gains. Controlling for students' backgrounds. Okay, so we don't want to take one teacher who's teaching a lot of kids who are just really easy to teach and another teacher who's teaching a lot of kids who are really difficult to teach and hold them accountable for making the same kind of progress. So we want to adjust for that. At the same time, if we're trying to set learning goals and targets for kids, we don't want to adjust for a whole lot because we want similar targets for all kids. We don't want to say you come from a more disadvantaged background, so we want a lower target for you. This question of when we adjust for kids' backgrounds and when we don't is becoming hotly debated, probably because people don't understand the difference, the issues. They're both useful measures depending upon what it is you're trying to do. Setting targets, we don't want to adjust that much. That's fair to kids. If we're trying to figure out how to calibrate our evaluations of teachers, and we do need to adjust for the composition of their classroom, that's fair to teachers. Okay, and so there are a number of things that we're kind of figuring out. Some of it we're in the middle of the work. I understand it can be frustrating not always to have access to all the conversations. I acknowledge that there are ideas that you might have that nobody has had. But earlier before when I said you can be an instigator, if you got a really great idea and you convince some people, they can pass it out, and ideas tend to spread and get around. So thank you for speaking up. I like pushback because it gives a chance to respond to some of the things that people often are thinking but don't want to say. Okay, so thanks for speaking for the other teachers in the room on some of that.
I know that there are many, many questions. This is the final formal mic question of the evening, but I would encourage you, those of you who do have questions, to please take a moment and talk to Dr. Ferguson following the formal presentation.
I live in the city limits of Grand Rapids, and I work in the suburb of Caledonia. And when we're trying to decide where we're going to live and where we want to send our kids to school, we start pulling stats from high schools. And it's pretty drastic, the difference between district to district in such close proximity. I'm just wondering societally what leads to some districts being so far behind others, and what can we do as a greater metro area to close that gap within a region?
Well, unfortunately, individual parents trying to make the best choice for their kids move out, and that contributes to the patterns.
Right.
So if we had folks staying around, well, one thing is that the data that were available to you gave you really no basis upon which to make that judgment. All you knew was the average scores or average proficiency levels.
Yeah.
You didn't have measures of how much kids are learning, okay? Because the MEP hasn't produced those yet, okay? So we need better tests, but we also then, for any given test, need measures of how much kids learn. Because you can have a school where the kids come from less advantaged backgrounds, their average proficiency rates are lower, but where they learn more than almost any place else. Okay, my favorite school these days is one where no matter where you start in the distribution, you can be among the top 10% of kids in the entire state at the end of 8th grade. There's this blue-collar school that's the biggest school in the state of Massachusetts. If you go there, even you're a high achiever, you're going to learn more than you go to almost any other school in the state. I live in the neighborhood right next to that school. I used to have a house there. I chose to move, like you did, to the next town over, only to discover that the town I moved out of was producing bigger test score gains than the town I moved into, even though the town I moved out of had much lower test score averages. Okay, so we need to get the data to allow us to know where the learning is actually occurring. Okay, because right now all it's really telling you is the average socioeconomic status of the population in the area. Okay, Brockton High School is when I was talking about between 4,000 and 5,000 kids, and they get these big gains in English language arts because their teaching is really good. And so if we can have the best schools be identified by the learning that they produce, not the level that the average kids score, that is one way to get more of the kind of integration that you're asking for. But we also just got to make sure that schools really are the best schools and work hard in improving the quality. So I think we're 10 minutes over, so I should stop. Okay. Oh, I was going to end with a poem. Can I end with the poem?
We still have poetry and an announcement.
Okay. This is the one that was written for high school teachers to get them to be more empathetic with their students. Gonna have my dinner at my grandma's house today. Mom's is staying late for work to make some extra pay. I got a lot of homework, but I'm worried about my mom, so that makes it hard to concentrate. My mind feels like a bomb. I also got to make sure that I wash some clothes to wear, and I got to get the stuff I need to tame my crazy hair. And while I'm doing that, I'll use the phone to make some calls to tell my friends the time and place for Friday at the mall. Sometime between now and then, I got to get some dough, because I ain't going to the mall all destitute and po'. I know, I should focus on that test I got in math, but my English paper's due soon, too. I need some help, real bad. Some teachers think I just don't care. Some think I'm not trying. I think I'm caught in a trap. Sometimes I just start crying. But no one ever sees my tears, because I just show the tough side. I like to seem real in control. If not book smart, then streetwise. I wish my teachers understood what it's like to be me, to see my life the way I do, the whole complexity. They see how hard it is to keep so many things in focus. They see how blurry things can get, how stuff can seem so hopeless. My teacher said I best to be ready when I take that test in math, but I ain't got no help at home. Never knew my dad. I want to go to college, but for that I need good grades, and based on what my grades are now, there may not be a way. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need someone who's wise to help me figure out which way to turn, to empathize. But let me stop daydreaming, because I got a lot to do. If I don't start my homework soon, I never will get through. If I try and still can't do it, just won't hand it in. But if I don't try, I'll never know. So here goes. I'll begin. Every day I pray to find someone to guide me and to care. Is there any chance that you could be the answer to my prayer? I think the fact that you're here tonight suggests that a lot of you would like to be part of the answer to kids' prayers. So welcome to the movement.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. On behalf of Grand Rapids Community College, we appreciate you being here and spending time with us this evening. Just a couple of reminders. We have two websites that we can go to for more information, agi.harvard.edu and tripodproject.org. Also, the great folks here at GRCC and Media Technologies, Dwayne and Hannah and other folks, tonight's presentation will be on our GRCC YouTube channel. So you can go back and retrieve everything there if you want to view it one more time. And that's typically up within about 24 hours or so. So, yes. So you can see everything. We can link to it from my website. There you go. All right. Thank you again for coming out this evening. We appreciate it. Have a good night.